we currently don't understand fundamental human biology enough to go after cancer. And I think one of the reasons for that is because we're looking at snapshots of life instead of trying to learn the video of life, trying to learn how we go from cradle to the grave, even without disease, and then add diseases into the equation. And now with generative AI, you can finally do that. So that's the most amazing thing. So now we started publishing life models. In biotech, regardless of what kind of biotech you are, you live and die by clinical trials. And even though the number of patients is not enough to be able to claim like super statistical significance, etc., it was such a huge relief because with this data, I can now go to the board, to the regulators, to my own employees and say, hey guys, well, this is what it is. So now if I die tomorrow, I don't think the program is going to die with me. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of it.
Of Kendall on Air, and today we have Alex Zhavoronkov with us. Alex is the co-CEO and founder of Insilico Medicine, of course, almost like a poster child in the world of AI-enabled drug discovery. They are omnipresent. And while we know a lot about the company, I can't quite figure out how Alex stays so productive because he's published almost 420 papers. He's at all these conferences. He actually travels 100% of the time. He seems to be spending quite a bit of time on LinkedIn as well while growing this global powerhouse. So how does he do it all? His devotion for longevity is also one of a kind. So if you look at his arm, he's got scars and he's used his tissues for stem cell manufacturing, for longevity research. So talk about having skin in the game. And of course, there was that phase 2A readout for IPF, which is a rare respiratory disease. And while the company is excited, skeptics or some press are saying that they simply need a bit more statistical significance. However, the readout is finally allowing Alex to get some sleep, so that's good. And I've learned a ton from the man. I hope you sit back and also enjoy the interview.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be speaking to you. And, the very first encounter of you was actually on BBC's segment, Nature's Building Block. And there was this very dramatic and very intense opening. And you said, I call no place home. I travel 100% of my time. And I was like, oh my God, that guy is, a machine. So, well, tell me what your life is like now. Has it changed? Is it still the same?
It got more intense, actually. Yeah, so now I travel even more. Now sometimes for kind of long-range travel, I travel more or less with comfort. Previously, it was even like transatlantic, transpacific was like very economy. Now sometimes we can afford business because we started generating like good revenue. But we were still very conservative in that regard. And the life is very intense. So when you have very many offices around the world and you are trying to keep the productivity level up, you have to travel. And you also have to operate in every time zone there is. I love it because for me, it's my passion. So when you really love what you are doing, it's not work. At the same time, sometimes it gets more intense, especially the last few weeks.
Sure.
Because when you get closer to like real readouts, it gets really stressful because you work for 10 years in biotech, right? Sometimes to take several years to build a platform, then you start generating assets. You create hype, you hustle, you publish, you deliver, you sell. But in biotech, regardless of what kind of biotech you are, you live and die by clinical trials. So if your clinical trial reads out poorly, especially if it's like significantly negative, you die. Or you drop dramatically and then you just need to figure out how to recover. If you do okay, you are okay, you can continue. If you do extremely well, you are very happy. And it's a big payout. And then you start thinking, okay, what is my next big goal within the organization, right? And now we started getting to the point where the kind of the gun is loaded. We've got a lot of bullets. And some of those bullets have already been shot, so you cannot change anything. And you are just waiting for them to hit. So we've succeeded several times, but we want to push the boundaries. And now the advances in generative AI allow you to perform many miracles that were not possible.
You've mentioned point of no return, and it's also immensely stressful at times. So, I mean, you do have a brilliant team around you. You have your partner, Alex, and, other folks in your team. It's kind of delegate the stress a little bit, divide and conquer. But how do you manage your stress, or what do you do to decompress?
Well, I actually feel much more comfortable when you work a little bit more. So if you have a lot of stress, just de-stress by taking your mind off it. Write a research paper. So research papers are a great way to escape the intensity. So you have to calm down, sit down, start writing. And I like doing that. And now I have other people working with me on that. So we now publish, I think, one paper every 10 days with very often with good experimental data. Sometimes it's algorithmic, sometimes it's experimental, sometimes it's a perspective on what we are trying to do. But we're trying to be maximally transparent. And I like to do general writing as well. So sometimes I just go online and relieve stress on LinkedIn, which is actually not bad because now I don't need to go to the media as much because I can reach a lot of biotech folks through my channel.
So that's interesting. To summarize, it sounds like you decompress by doing more work, but other types of work that are all kind of connected together for a higher, goal or vision.
Correct. Or sometimes you just do small things that are very easily achievable. So I like design. So I design, clothing, robots.
Great. And, I've actually had a few friends comment, does he have a few clones? Because he's on LinkedIn and he's at this conference and he's writing papers and then, you're growing an empire. So how does it do it all? Like, do you have a morning routine? Like you have to exercise or meditate? Like, is there something that keeps you sharp and 100%?
Well, I sleep for very little. So today I slept, I think, 3 hours, right? Because, again, you just need to do conference calls constantly with the team. And some of them are extremely self-motivating. And we have 2 CEOs in the company. So I'm in charge of AI and general management. And I have Dr. Renfong, who is an immense authority on drug discovery. I wouldn't have been able to do it myself. But you need to be constantly in communication with everybody, so you don't sleep much. And I think that's probably my least healthy trait. But many other things, like, for example, when I wake up, I do maybe 100 push-ups or I have a resistance band, and it very quickly brings me back to life. So you spend just maybe, 15 minutes exercising every day, and just to have this mental calmness that you have done something useful for yourself. And I usually don't over-exercise. I usually try to, have some of the longevity drugs, so to speak. And I have my own routine. So I hope that they're helping. And helping stay younger and more productive. I do regular diagnostic tests, at least, so blood work is at least once a month to ensure that, nothing is failing. You want to ensure that you get regular checkups. It's a good idea. And a couple times a year, I do full body analysis. I go to Human Longevity. That's Craig Venter's company, now run by Huawei Wu. And I also try to get non-invasive tests for cancer. But except for that, I have just very high level of motivation because nothing motivates me more than knowing that, your drug may actually help patients. Previously, I really liked to publish in high-profile journals because it's a sense of completion. You contributed to the body of science. But now if you can really demonstrate that you're making patients' lives better, nothing comes close.
So I'm wondering, is this linked to your childhood or upbringing? Because obviously you're dedicating your life to longevity, helping people live better, longer lives, right? So where did that come from exactly?
Well, I kind of grew up in the space era, right? So when people like to watch space movies, science fiction, and that was just after the space race. So I was always thinking I was still inspired by those heroes of the past. So now what Elon is doing for the current generation, I hope they are inspired, right? Because now they can touch greatness and see the dreams become reality much quicker. And now they can read the three-body problem or Neil Stephenson's books and get inspired. Back then, I also liked science fiction. But even before, I just thought when I was a child, look at the stars, you think, okay, well, if I want to go and travel really far, this lifetime would not be enough. So you don't have a chance. And that's unfair. So regardless of how hard you try, you would not be able to reach even a simple goal to see a little bit further than, just a small, tiny fraction of a light year. Unless you figure out the way to hibernate. And that's actually probably the technology that we are going to see within our lifetime. And that's going to change everything, hibernation technology. But I thought that, I want to go and research aging to understand how do we slow down some of the processes that limit our lifetime. So nature is intrinsically unfair. And I started thinking about it very, very early, even before high school. So you kind of come into this world, you compete, you reproduce, you take care of your young, and then you gradually decline and die. And in that gradual decline and die, you need to figure out how to motivate yourself, because whatever you do, regardless of how hard you try, it's not going to help. So there should be a way for people who work extremely hard to be able to live a little bit longer to achieve their goal. And I thought that, there is nothing out there that changes this dramatic paradigm. So we saw the personal computer, the advent of the mobile devices, the internet, and then social networks, generative AI. And guess what? Life expectancies for well-off people did not change much. So regardless of how well you live, what kind of medical care you get, you are plateauing. And unless we figure out some more dramatic ways to extend life, we're not going to make a huge progress. And I decided just to go into this area. I became basically Derek Love of longevity. So near-term skeptic, long-term optimist, exactly like that, right? So nothing works, right? And we need to accelerate. And unless we dedicate even more resource and a little bit more focus and get more people into this, we are not going to move the needle dramatically. And you also need to be personally committed for a very long time. Even when new shiny things come along, you don't want to jump and do those things because you need to deliver on your promise. We currently don't understand fundamental human biology enough to go after cancer. And I think one of the reasons for that is because we're looking at snapshots of life instead of trying to learn the video of life. Trying to learn how we go from cradle to the grave, even without disease, and then add diseases into the equation. And now with generative AI, you can finally do that. So that's the most amazing thing. So now we started publishing life models. And that gives me a little bit more optimism. There are physiological changes that transpire. You start getting gray hair, sarcopenia, and many other forms of dysfunction, and then diseases, and they die. And people like to steer their attention away into other directions. Sometimes it's religion, sometimes it's philosophy, sometimes it is family. But nobody is dramatically, well, there are a few small group of people who are dedicated to either trying to solve a scientific problem, and they're just doing it for the sake of science. And some people are dedicated to actually turning the science into products. Mm-hmm. And once you get into this state of mind, you also realize that it's not easy. Who thought that Elon would be able to launch rockets into space at the level or above the level of NASA, super capital intensive, right? And then go to Mars. And he will, for sure, no question, right? So it's just a matter of time. But he had to develop a sustainable business model. So unless you figure out how to develop dual purpose technology to help you sustain yourself without preferably additional investment or with small external investment, and ensure that the business is sustainable and continuous even without you, you won't be able to achieve significant results in longevity.
And longevity is in some ways a very ironic topic because obviously everyone dies, so it provides fairness to every single person out there. But in some ways, longevity, the things that we know, such as, infusing a young blood into an older person, or all these like ideas that we have, right? Yeah. They seem to be something that is only accessible to a very privileged few. Is that, very sci-fi, nonsense? How do we democratize longevity?
Well, first of all, blood transfusions, from what we know now, it's not exactly the most effective way to extend longevity, right? So there are no dramatic clinical trials with clear benefits to the elderly, neither by using the aging clocks or doing longitudinal experiments. Even on mice or higher organisms, we don't see dramatic improvements in health with parabiosis from young to old, and sometimes they actually live together for a very long time. It's not just a small donation of blood. So that technology is promising, but I think it's a small, tiny drop in a huge bucket. And the more we understand about how to target it, the more you understand that it's actually going to be super democratizable technology. Some of the champion drugs, like rapamycin extends life in mice. In combination with acarbose, it's like 15 to 20% consistently. You combine it with some other drugs, you can get even more torque. So think of it as additional 30 years of life for a human. And they actually are physiologically more fit. And if you exercise, you could probably get even bigger torque. Currently, we don't have clinical trials for rapamycin aging. We don't even know how it affects the aging clocks in a proper clinical trial setting. There are some N of 1s, anecdotal. But if you look at this drug, it costs peanuts to make, right? So it's basically cents. If you get a high-end branded, Pfizer Rapamune, it's going to cost you hundreds of dollars, right? But not thousands, and you're not going to take it every day. If a clinical trial were to be conducted demonstrating significant improvements in health span and compression of the period where you're going to be very susceptible to disease, and this drug demonstrates clinical efficacy in aging, countries would be funding those drugs and providing them to everybody. As a matter of fact, those trials should be funded by the government. Also, aging is not considered to be a disease. And by the way, now we kind of gave up on even advocating for it to be considered to be a disease, because with the current regulatory framework, you actually don't need to. If your drug is powerful enough to work on aging, and there are very few of them, there's a handful, including rapamycin in many organisms except for humans so far, it should work on many diseases, right? So that's the idea of dual purpose therapeutics. And now imagine a drug that is as powerful as rapamycin, but with very long patent life, novel mechanism, and targeting a broad spectrum of diseases. So that's what we are going after with dual purpose therapeutics. So massive indication expansion potential, very clear-cut therapeutic approval path, right? So you're looking for a very clear disease that you can target, age-related, and later you would be able to conduct biomarker-augmented studies if the drug gets approved, but you need to prove that it's safe and effective, and then you make it very easily available to everybody, because small molecules, easy to make. They're much easier and cheaper to make than biologics that you need to inject. Once they go off patent, they become available to everybody. And I think that's the clearest path to modulating aging at scale without thinking about, where you are in the social hierarchy. I think that people are thinking about, rich and poor. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to do that nowadays, right? Because, and by the way, poor nowadays may be somebody with a cell phone who has access to the same entertainment as a billionaire, because they have access to like Netflix and some other resource. So it's a little bit different standards of poverty than we had before in a society where people were starving and dying. Mm-hmm. So now think about people who are alive today and who may experience this kind of level of quality of life, and they just die before getting there. So you don't get to live this beautiful future. So that is the ultimate form of inequality.
And I think you identify yourself as Canadian now, but you were born and raised until you were 17 in Latvia.
Correct.
And you have this very accumulated pedigree of schooling done in Canada, Johns Hopkins here in the US, and also in Moscow, Russia. I would suspect that you consider yourself a global citizen. And how has that changed your view with, doing business as in some ways an immigrant entrepreneur here? Do you have any advice for folks that are in that position?
Well, kind of from my perspective, sometimes I feel sad because people are very nationalistic, right? So they usually like to assign some value to where they were born and to how they look like and the language they speak, and sometimes even the color of their skin, unfortunately. For me, I just don't care. So once you stop caring, any kind of geopolitical conflicts based on nationalism become very comical. I do not associate myself with any country. And at Insilico, we actually have several policies, so we don't use human personal data. So especially genomic data. So if it's not publicly available, we try to protect ourselves from that data. We don't take money from the government unless it's a standard program for grants or whatever. So anybody can apply. And we also don't engage in any kind of government business. And we are against war. So that's why no military. No dual use, and that's just not what we are about. So don't take any political stance.
We were talking about how clinical trials take so long. I mean, drug discovery in general, minimum 12 years, right? Kendall Square is the best biotech hub, obviously, but in terms of talent retention, it's actually incredibly hard because there are just so many options out there for these ML, AI, and bench scientists, right? So pharma nomad is obviously a new term that we're familiar with, but what is kind of your definition of talent in this biotech world?
So in the tech world, it's even worse, right? Especially if you're operating globally. Boston is not the worst, right? Usually, if you look at, let's say, at the time when China was booming, right? So when technology industry was just like going crazy, right? And overheating, I would say. So right now it's kind of maybe stabilized, right? Or even like plateaued. So talent is not as eager to leave you. But if you were operating there, and we don't do much AI in that region, right? But we do a lot of drug discovery. And even there, the recruiter usually knows the family, right? So places the employee in, right? And then like half a year, they start offering new opportunities. So usually like in a year or two, they would want to have a major raise or a promotion. Otherwise, they leave, right? And sometimes those promotions like 30%. So in some regions and industries, the flow could be even higher. Now it's kind of stabilized. Here in Boston, there are people who are very serious about the therapeutic programs and the science they're doing. And in that case, they would be staying with the company for a very long time. And they would be staying there just to see the readout, right? And just to see the drug succeed. And they're comfortable with where they are. And some people like to chase new shiny things. One of the biggest problems in the biopharma industry, and that is the chasing the new shiny things before completing the clinical trials. So my timelines are now dramatically different from what you can see in the pharmaceutical industry, right? So my average time to preclinical candidate, 13 months. My average time to phase 1 is about 2 years, from zero. And that's including like high novelty or moderate novelty targets. So in pharma, that time frame usually would take 5, 6, 7 years, right? When the target is not enough validated, right? And during this 5, 7 years, sometimes executives change like 5, 6 times, right? So I'm talking about the multiple executives in the hierarchy, because the head of the therapeutic area must be there, the program manager must be there, chief science officer must be there, and the CEO must be there in order for the program to progress. Sometimes some of them can switch, right? But whenever there is a top-level change, there is massive deprioritization of therapeutic assets. And sometimes they go after a completely different disease area and exit another. And that means that this long train of therapeutic programs that was created over decades is now thrown away. So sometimes it's hundreds of millions or billions of dollars invested. They're thinking, okay, sunk cost, and we're just going to throw it away. Even, and the worst case is that when they already created the chemistry for it and applied for patents and had broad coverage for this chemistry, means that if you later find this asset and there is short patent life remaining on that asset, so it's going to get generic before you develop it, people are not going to pick those molecules for development anymore. It dies. So it doesn't get recycled. Right? Sometimes it does get recycled, but most of the time it doesn't. That's why those transitions are deadly. And some people are clinging to their careers more than to therapeutic programs. And sometimes they just like to chase new shiny things. So I'm running Insilico for now over 10 years. And I'm not planning to stop, right? So I really want to see the readouts into phase 3, right? So, and including partnered readouts. So if we're lucky enough, we're going to get there. And I think we have everything to achieve this goal. And during the same time, like Roche changed their CSOs, like R&D leadership, I think 3 times, twice, 3 times, at least twice. Sanofi, 3 times. Novartis, 3 R&D leaders. So in some cases it's dramatic, like GSK, for example, when they changed the leadership and Hal Baron came in, a lot of drugs got deprioritized, and I saw that myself because we had a partnership. So a lot of internal programs were just thrown away in favor of others. And sometimes those others do not hold after the R&D leader leaves. And external collaborations also get destroyed. And sometimes entire companies, startups, once you lose a contract, your lifeline, if you are not flushed with cash and you don't care, if you are really into what you're doing and you're passionate about that and you bet on one company, if something like that happens, you might die. And that happened to us a couple times, right? So once with GSK, for example, no secret, in like early 2015, 2016, had multiple pilots, structured the collaboration, and then it got cut, right? So and you are like, okay, I've got 3 months worth of cash or 4 months, right? What do I do? So I had to put a lot of my own money into the company, right? And I didn't get salary till like 2018 or 2019. So I think this kind of commitment, dedication from the core team stayed. And I think that if you are planning a career in biotech, you should have the patient in mind more than anything. Sure. So I think that it's very, very important to stay on goal. And when you are looking for a company to work for, it was difficult to start your own. Trust me, you probably don't want to go there unless you have like something very special. You're writing like a massive trend and you're an expert. If you are working for a company, you should try to find one where you believe in the program and you're willing to stay with the program before it reads out into human clinical trial.
Is this something that can be done systematically? Because on a people-to-people level, maybe I stay longer, but my boss doesn't, and as a result, the program gets axed or something, right? So how do we actually change this from a top-down maybe level?
Sure. So first of all, investors and board members must be very aware of this problem. If they are not aware of this problem, they will always try to think that they have an internal inefficiency. They are going after the wrong therapeutic area, or their programs have low probability of success and they need to buy something. They have some gaps in R&D, and that's why they need to buy something and fire their own. So the board members and the shareholders need to understand this long-term commitment that people need to be making. So they need to ensure that the CSO, for example, doesn't go anywhere. And very often when you get a young and ambitious CSO who they want you to refresh the pipeline, that could be the first person, because they are young and ambitious, they're really interested in doing something else right after. So you're just a step in the career that allowed them to, build a network, shine, make big changes, and be those kind of destructive forces that restructure internal R&D. Very often it doesn't need to be restructured, especially in the core therapeutic areas. Now you can see that the European companies like, Roche and Novartis are now adopting this new philosophy of rapid rotation. Japanese companies, they moved the R&D here into Boston, which is not a bad idea, right? Especially if you move BD, so business development for sourcing of innovation, buying stuff, right? But deprioritizing the long-term R&D in Japan, for example, bad idea, right? So those guys managed to demonstrate that they can build out of a tiny island the entire innovative biotechnology industry, where they make long-term bets, and when they win, they get massive benefits in neuroscience, right? In metabolic diseases and cancer. And I think this recycling is bad very often. Sometimes it's good, but most of the time it's bad. Another thing about pharma innovation is that there is lack of accountability. So usually what gets reported by big pharma companies is number of phase ones, phase twos, phase threes. Most of the time, the CEOs care about phase twos, phase threes, and because that's where you've got efficacy, you've got closer to approval, so something that might get onto the market within their careers and contribute to the company bottom line. But actually, when it comes to looking at the efficiency of earlier stage R&D, sometimes it's disclosed what is there, right? So maybe not early preclinical, right? But you don't know how much it took to get there. How long did it take to get there? How much resources were invested per program? So if that were available, you would be like, oh my God, I'm just wasting, $1 billion, $2, $3 billion and a lot of time. If you look at GLP-1s right now, the dominant force is Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly. If you talk to people who were on those programs for a very long time, so it's of course arguable who discovered the target, but major contributions came from Jens Juul Holst from University of Copenhagen and also close advisor to Novo Nordisk. That target was discovered in the early 80s. My God, right? So and only now, basically more than 30 years later, you got this target implicated in weight loss. But those drugs required very long-term commitment. And people at Novo who were developing it, they're with the company for 20 years. You talk to people at Eli Lilly and look at the background of those GLP-1 inhibitors, Mounjaro. They're with the company for 20, 22 years, right? So think about that. 20 years, it's a career. Big pharma, if you have a problem, well, gradually downsize, review the programs, and just spend less as a percentage of sales on your own R&D. My problem also is that business development in pharma is much slower than anywhere else, right? So these guys need to be traders. They need to be much more active, but they also got used to very long cycles. Takes you about 6 to 9 months to close a deal. In that time, much can happen on the competitive front, right? So, or on the financing front, if you're a biotech, right? The asset might die before it gets licensed. And then, some pharma changes direction and the beautiful asset gets destroyed and discarded and not even recovered. So I think that very strong commitment to the therapeutic program is very, very important, but it has to go top down and also bottom up. So pharma became much more careless with talent, and talent became less loyal. In AI, people really like to change jobs, right? Because any startup gets additional $1 billion generative AI and they want to hire, where do they go, right? So they go to companies that actually have talent with that experience. Recruiters attack, they can double the salary, and then the person goes, right? Unfortunately, and you cannot do anything about it. But now that kind of attitude also propagated into biotech. And that shouldn't be the case. And some of them are not financially motivated at all. So my co-founder, Alex Zhavoronkov, he is actually also for the first 6-7 years in the company development, salaries were dramatically low. And they also got used to pretty ambitious goals. So you don't want to work in a company where you don't get real-time feedback. Yeah. And you were asking about management style. So, I will always be direct with you, right? So I treat everybody fairly, so there is no favoritism. Don't care who you are. I don't care how long you have been working with me. I don't care where you come from, what your credentials are. If you cannot deliver in the right time frame and work as a single organism, I will tell you right away, right? Or if I asked you to design something or perform certain experiments, right? And I know how much it takes because I do it all the time. I used to do it all the time. I know how much time it takes, right? And if they don't do that, That's really a pity. So you need to immediately give feedback.
Airbnb's founder, Brian Chesty, recently said at the YC event that there is founder mode and manager mode. And founder mode is when, you're not bringing on seasoned executives, or there's no playbook where you have references and protocols. And in the biotech world or in drug discovery realm, how do you think leadership plays out when you have this founder mode versus manager mode, like seasoned, you gone through the drill 100 times, and especially I guess with clinical trial experience is important, but also grit and perseverance. So what would you say when you're recruiting for your leadership? What are you looking for?
So I like the concept of MMA fighting, right? So if you are to win an MMA, you cannot be good on the ground. You cannot just be good on hand on the punching and kicking. You have to be good at both. And you have to be good at wrestling. And as a matter of fact, you even have to be good at PR. Otherwise, you would not be famous. So for us, the ultimate objective is to get the drug approved. So you have to be both the manager and you need to be a founder, right? And actually, when you are running a clinical program or preclinical program at Insilico, or developing some new piece of software, you will be in the founder mode very often, right? Because I will ask you to put your best, right? You cannot relax and smell the roses for half a year while the experiments are going. You would need to do much more. At the very least, you need to go deep into biology or into chemistry and support other programs. So we're looking for people who can do more than just be managers, right? ChatGPT can outperform you if you're just a manager, right? And some people like to jump from company to company when they're just in the founder mode. And very often those companies fail because as a founder, you usually know the ropes better than anybody, right? And you can go deeper. And with some experience, you get so much better at it that you know where the pressure points are, what are the most important things that can kill your company or impede its progress. So with experience, you get this manager mode as well. And so you start getting the board proper. Once you get big VCs, especially private equity firms, cost cutting, manager mode, reflection, CEO training. So all of those things you have to do. So what we figured out is that we need two CEOs. So one is kind of the adult in the room, who really knows what he's doing and he's brilliant at it. And me, who is a little bit, a little bit more promotional than what you would get in biotech. I like to say what we're planning to do, and where we want to get, and our big goal, which is aging. And people in pharma, they kind of very much dislike that. Especially if you get them on the board. So you don't want those people who don't like that approach. I learned that too. And you want to get people who are aligned a little bit. For me, I can innovate at scale, right? So I'm allowed to innovate in AI, for example, there. The cycles of innovation are much faster than in the pipeline world, right? So you have to constantly invent new things. And if you stop, you're not an AI company. And actually, when we started in 2014, there were probably, 500 competitors. 2018, 2019, that's when there was a big explosion. 2,000 competitors, maybe more, and most of them were in China, actually. So lots of mushrooming. Boom, huge. Even lazy university professors started the company because VCs came to them and said, well, 10, 15, $20 million, right? But they burned through it very quickly, right? And once you realize that you cannot get to PCC, to preclinical candidate, or get a drug into through IND enabling studies, right? people get demotivated, you don't get the second round of funding, and you die. And suddenly, boom, it's got huge consolidation. And now you've got only a few companies at the top, right? Maybe like 3. Companies that died, they were in that founder mode on the AI side. That's like the worst, right? So you create a new shiny thing, say, oh, AlphaFold is great. I'm doing something better. Give me the money. Let me get you the drug. It's a tiny piece of the puzzle, right? And once you realize, and investors realize that get them demotivated. Or you're a biotech executive, you were working on a drug for a long time. You're like, oh, AI is hype. So now let me spice it up, get a couple academics together, right? So position it as an AI discovered drug, get the money. So some of those, they actually are more successful than the others than AI first. Because if AI company fails like that, all your people leave immediately, right, to other companies. It's like, they realize, okay, it's not doing well, you're not an AI company anymore. And 6 months to a year later, the tech has changed so much that it's easier to start a new one. I think that people who repackaged assets with AI, these are a little bit more successful, but now it's visible, right? So they either in-license a drug or you can see where it came from. And I think that it's very important to have a balance. So have cutting-edge innovation, founder style or bigger, and somebody who really takes care of the business and ensures that it's operational. And look at Elon. How many companies? 7, 8, all at the cutting edge and all are delivering? How? Right? So that kind of management style, go acquire that kind of management style. But that requires at least one big exit so you have your own money to play with, right? And you can say, okay, I'm going to deploy, let's say, half of my capital on this. People know that I'm going to deliver. Let's go, right? And the technology is at the state of readiness where it can be applied. If you are in the cutting edge tech business, you need to run fast and faster than anybody else because you need to innovate and invent all the time.
That's a very insightful, perspective.
So learn from Elon if you want to be like a cutting edge. That's the role model.
I know you got 4 hours of sleep today, but you look like you meditated for 4 hours. I think I have an inkling of what kept you up in the last few weeks. But you do have that great news, right? So tell us a little bit about this phase 2A for IPF and what's coming next.
Sure. Well, that's our signature program. So in 2019, we decided that we want to now apply our end-to-end capabilities where we apply a form of generative AI, but also many AI-based predictors to identify a bunch of targets for multiple chronic diseases, prioritize them, and really go after one of them seriously. So we had maybe a couple of shots on goal at that time. So I had to choose from 60,000 opportunities. And we decided to choose one target, so TNIK, which is not so obvious of a target in fibrosis because it's not dramatically differentially expressed, but there are multiple external sources of evidence and sources of confidence that implicated in fibrosis, but also in aging. We wanted to get something that is moderately druggable and applied our chemistry 42 to generate molecules. We only synthesized 79, but at that time, pharma companies used to synthesize 2,000 to 2,500 molecules per program. One molecule usually is like $2,000 to $7,000 to synthesize and test enzymatically, right? And if it's more difficult, it could be much more. And if you want to go into mice, right, it's even more per molecule. So we did it very, very cheaply. We documented everything. We even started doing a documentary video about this program because we thought that we are going to fail, and I don't want to fail without leaving some legacy. Also, 2021, we nominated the preclinical candidate, That's how I also met Dr. Ren, so my now co-CEO. He started co-supervising this program. He's like, wow, it's actually good, so let's do it, right? And we nominated one more preclinical candidate for the same target in kidney fibrosis. First, we nominated one in lung fibrosis. Then we went after skin, after kidney, got a lot of evidence, went into cancer, into other diseases that I cannot talk about yet with the same target. And 2021, we got the PCC, and the same year we actually started our first in human. So then 2022, phase 1 in New Zealand and in China. And imagine that those are like COVID years. So conducting clinical trials, very difficult, right? So you have to go into geographies where it's possible. So 2 phase 1s in healthy volunteers. And it's turned out to be safe. We're like, wow, good safety. Check mark. And we submitted a research paper to Nature Biotechnology, submitted in 2023 mid-year. And we were already in phase 2. And it took like close to a year to get published. It's massive data release in there. We also have a conversational interface for the paper. And we have high hopes, right? Because once you demonstrate many preclinical experiments with efficacy, many, and the molecule is safe, it should work somewhere, right? So hopefully, you really want your first indication to work before you kind of purpose it to others. And it could be very difficult if you fail, right? Because your investors could say, you know what, just let's become smaller, right? And, reorganize and cut a lot of people, become a traditional biotech on other assets. So we were extremely nervous in phase 2, right? So still nervous, but we decided to do phase 2A. So dosing for a short period of time, 12 weeks of dosing for IPF. IPF is a deadly disease, dramatic, and I deeply care for those patients because I've seen some of them, I know some of them. And usually they expire within a few years. And that expiration is associated with dramatic reductions in lung function. So what is measured is forced vital capacity of the lung. And that's also the efficacy biomarker for most of the drugs. And usually on standard of care, like pirfenidone or nintedanib, they decline, but they decline slower. So we've got a very negative trend. So very rarely you can see any improvement. And in clinical trials with 12 weeks dosing, almost never. So you start from, let's say, where you were diagnosed and enrolled, and then you measure and it improves. That's very difficult. Right? And usually it's not dose dependent. So we did not expect that. That's why we put it as a secondary outcome measure, right? The primary outcome measure was safety to ensure that, okay, we actually show that it's safe. And later we will optimize and maybe find a better dose, or we also have an inhalable formulation that should allow you to get even more dose without systemic effects. And now we got the blinded data, and the blinded data, I cannot tell you the details, right? But a lot of forced vital capacity trends are improving, right? And I'm like, wow. So, and when people internally look at it, they're saying, hey, if it's the drug, it's magic. It doesn't happen very often, right? So let's wait until the unblinding, and then a week, actually 10 days after I saw this data, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. And before the blinded data also, same thing, right? Because you are extremely worried. You know approximately the safety, right? Because you see the reports from the battlefield, so to speak, and if there are no casualties to the war, right? So, and no dramatic wounds, so to speak, you're okay with the battlefield, right? So it should be like more or less safe battlefield. But then the unblinding should imagine that you are shooting at the disease, right? And you don't know, you're shooting blanks and real bullets, right? And you don't know which ones actually are hitting the targets. So that's the value of double-blind placebo-controlled trials. And then just last week, Dr. Rand calls me up, says, Alex, you know what? We unblinded, we analyzed the data. Here is the chart for you. And I cried, yeah. So wow. I'm like, wow, because you see dose-dependent response.
Yes.
And even though the number of patients is not enough to be able to claim like super statistical significance, etc., it was such a huge relief because with this data, I can now go to the board, to the regulators, to my own employees and say, hey guys, well, this is what it is. We of course need to submit it to the peer-reviewed publication and the conference to ensure that the community is also aware of this data and believes in this data. So because when the company makes a claim, it doesn't mean anything, right? It needs to be peer-reviewed and then there needs to be other rounds of clinical trials. But once I saw the data, it hit me, right? So now if I die tomorrow, I don't think the program is gonna die with me. And that's the beauty of it, right? So you kind of know that the confidence level in that program has increased. That is a huge milestone in my life. So, and sometimes you make statements, right? They are maybe future friendly. Sometimes you do it to motivate people, you do it to motivate yourself. But now once the results are out, that's our most important outcome. And suddenly I've never had kids yet, but it's kind of like, having a child, seeing it go to school, graduate with a PhD, and now let's see what kind of wonderful things it can do.
Right. Yeah.
And that's compressed in one moment, right? So that is an incredible feeling. And you want to do more of that. So now expect like more motivated Alex with a little bit more, with a black belt in drug discovery, right? So you should see us basically with a machine gun of PCCs, right?
Sure, yeah. And it's one of those things, it's not just a legacy like the documentary you thought might potentially happen, but something that could live on forever and really impact and touch so many lives.
Exactly. I mean, look at the bookshelves. There are very few books about the discovery of drugs. Like, name one that you know. I'll give you a couple just in case. One is called The $1 Billion Molecule, about Vertex Pharmaceuticals here in Boston, right? Beautiful story. But most drugs do not get the luxury of getting a book. And we wanted to ensure that we have a documentary video for that.
I'm going to go and watch one of them. Where can I watch it?
Insilico.com/docuthon. And there are the results and you can see the videos.
Okay, awesome. We'll check it out. Well, Alex, thank you so much today for this very insightful conversation.
Very happy to be with you.
Right, great. Thank you.